And it came to me. Thank you. Okay, got it.
Now you can offer guidance, please. No way.
It's on the side.
Down in front.
1, 2.
Well, while we still have 3 minutes, we'll have a little commercial announcement. And that is that next meeting, Richard Kidder is going to talk his passion for pickleball. And he's got some really cute slides, even when he was a little boy about it. Then in August, we've been working really hard to get one of the first showings of this documentary that I saw at South by Southwest, which was Plastic People. And it's pretty amazing. But so there's a screening fee, but we're trying to get that alleviated so we can have free tickets. And we're going to show it in the LEC. So for the fourth Tuesday in August, we hope to be able to meet in the LEC. And if there's a lot of people, maybe we'll have overflow over here. And just in terms of Trace Talks, you know, we're really indebted to Tom Thompson, who started this. And to me, it's so perfect because it draws on all of the amazing people. Every one of you sitting here has so many stories, so much expertise. I'm talking to one guy, and he was a cotton journalist broker. I mean, I never knew all this stuff about cotton. And I want to thank you all who have volunteered. I help make the slides, so if you don't mind getting up and standing in front of people, we'll get the slides to help you talk, because I think this is what pulls us together, to know what a rich community we have. So many different identities that we have, other than the ones that we see as we pass each other in the hall or see each other in the dining room. And so today, we are lucky to have 2 speakers today. You know, we just can't get away here being in Texas about all the issues with immigration. And as I help these ladies prepare this, oh my gosh, no wonder this is so complicated. I mean, it's mind-boggling, really, to me, when I'm trying to get clarity from Janet. Well, what does that mean? Well, this thing, you know. So we're so happy. Janet is a lawyer, and Sandi is an accredited, I didn't even know what this was, legal immigration representative. I mean, there's so many interesting issues about that. And because they have so much information to share, if they could go through their presentation and then they'll stay afterwards. But if you get off track, there's so many rabbit holes we can go down. So if we could just kind of stay above ground until we get into the warrants later. So I'm going to ask Janet to introduce herself, and we'll get started.
Hi everybody, I'm so glad everybody came. This is good. If this is too loud, is this too loud?
No.
To me it sounds like I'm booming. Anyway, what I wanted to say is Rich pointed out to us that, that might make a difference. Thank you, Rich. Rich pointed out to us that on the first slide it says June 23rd, but actually today is the 25th. But
That was a test. I wanted to see if anybody caught it.
All
right,
Okay. Okay. All right. So, briefly, my history.
Louder.
You lost it.
I lost it.
Did you both it?
We had it every single
Thank you, both did. Hey, you're not bad. You're not great. I know. So it's not working? Did you come in?
It did work.
Yeah.
It's not working. All right, let me use the other one.
Just check one more. No, nothing's working?
Okay.
There it goes.
Well, it's red.
Yeah, you're doing, it's good.
It's
Sorry.
You know, I know immigration, but these technical things, forget about it. So, anyway, okay, Peace Corps in Columbia. After getting my BA, got a master's University of Chicago, JD at University of Houston because we moved here, and basically I've practiced immigration law for 30 years, and I did all kinds of things. You name it, deportation, asylum, business, people, citizenship, whatever. So I'm going to try to give you an overview today, but I also want to mention kind of in between and at the end, and sort of as a way of explaining everything, I'll tell you about client cases. I think I'm moving too much. So how about this thing?
Yeah,
All right.
click the switch up.
This is
Yeah.
good. Okay, all right.
You just have to hold it up.
Okay. All right. Well, if that's the worst of our problems, I think we're okay.
Louder.
Louder.
I don't think
Yeah,
so.
you have to hold it up real close.
Right, like this.
Like Madonna.
All right, okay, let's see if we can get going here. Anyway, I want to tell you, I've represented, as I said, all kinds of different people. At one point, I had my own law office, and I was representing some people in a hearing before a judge, and the people were supposed to be in transit to Canada to relatives, but they couldn't get a plane out. So they ended up staying at our house overnight, and then I had this Peruvian woman whose father had gotten asylum because he was persecuted by the Sendero Luminoso, the Shining Path. She was supposed to go to Washington, D.C., but there was a blizzard, so she ended up staying at our house too. So my kids got, like, okay, the immigration attorney, that's my mom. One of the things that you have to know as an immigration attorney, it's not just immigration law, it's family law too. Especially in Texas, we've got to know all about common law marriages, because that really is important for immigration law, whether you're married or you're not married, did you prove it up, if you got a declaration, or what. The other thing is criminal law, and the most complicated part of immigration law is criminal, because it keeps changing. The Supreme Court makes decisions, courts are making decisions, the Immigration Service is changing their minds, the judges, the whole thing. So I would say that's the most complicated part of immigration law. And I had a client, for example, he was an engineer from Canada, and he said, hey, I want to apply for citizenship. I want to go through the naturalization process. I have a green card. So, okay. And I started asking him the questions. Were you ever arrested? Blah, 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 convicted? Well, not in the U.S. I said, okay, that was my first clue. All right, tough case. How much did I say I was going to charge this guy? Okay, anyway, ended up being a conviction for a small amount of marijuana in Canada. So I had to analyze Canadian law and U.S. law and try to figure out, because you don't want to get to a naturalization interview, citizenship interview at the immigration office. Oh, I'm so happy to see you. Not only we're taking away your permanent residence, we're going to put you in deportation. You don't want that. So the other case, you might have heard of this guy, John Lennon. Remember him? Okay, John Lennon also had a little possession of marijuana back in the UK. So he had difficulty. There are 4 court cases, if you look it up on the internet, about him and what happened to him. He finally got approved, and what happened there was the attorney also took the UK law, the US law, compared them. Okay, well, they're not the same, therefore, okay, you've got this conviction in the UK, but it doesn't count for the US. So don't worry about that. So if you Google the Immigration Nationality Act, as I said, you'll find over 500 laws. So here are some laws. I just chose a few. The Chinese Exclusion Act is very, it lasted a long time, as you could see. It lasted from 1882 to 1943. And Asians were not allowed to become U.S. citizens until 1952. The McCarran-Walter Act. So there's all kinds of immigration acts, as you can see, they're related to specific events. You can see war brides. Well, what do we need war brides for? Well, it was after the war. A lot of the GIs had war brides from other countries. Ronald Reagan had, signed a law of amnesty. We needed nurses. We had a Nursing Relief Act. And also, a lot of times Congress will say, okay, we're going to pass this law now, but it's only good for a couple of years. So for example, we had a Soviet scientists law one time, and that was good for like 4 years. The most blatant example of this is the Violence Against Women Act that was passed originally, I think, in the early 90s, and then has to be renewed every couple of years. I mean, you say, why don't they make it permanent? Don't ask me. I don't know. I just practice law, or I used to practice law. Anyways, well, then not only do we have laws, but we have interpretation of the laws through regulations. So here you got this book that's like this thick with these 500 laws, and then you have a few different books like the tax code, but in immigration for other things. So, like for example, if I tell you asylum, you need a well-founded fear of persecution. You're gonna tell me, well, what the heck does that mean? That's gonna be defined by case law, but it's also gonna be in the regulations. As if I tell you, well, yes, I was resettled in Switzerland after I left Vietnam. This is actually a case I had. After I left Vietnam, I resettled in Switzerland. What does resettled mean? Because if you were resettled in another country, you're not eligible for asylum. So that's a whole, you can imagine the discussions that go on of what is firm resettlement. Does that mean you've got a green card in the other country? Did you live there forever? Were you married to somebody? You know, so all these interpretations are not clear just reading the law. Okay. So I want to talk to you about some basics. Okay, now I need to go to the slide that says government agencies. Okay, so we have the law. So you got this book with 500 laws in it, and then who's going to enforce the laws? Who's going to implement the laws? How is that going to work? So you have all these government agencies. You just don't, I mean, you're probably most familiar with U.S. Customs and Border Protection because you come to the border, boom, that's who's there. Those officers are there to stop you from coming in or let you come in. So that's definitely Customs and Border Protection. ICE, you can remember that if you're going to be deported, they're the ones, and they will just slide you right out of the United States. So if you remember ICE and deportation, that will help you. Now, the benefit side, you have citizenship and immigration services. So for example, somebody who's trying to get a green card might be overseas trying to get a green card at an American consulate. That is regulated by Department of State. But if you're in the US and you go to the immigration office here, that's regulated by Citizenship and Immigration Services. So it's kind of complicated, and it matters where you are and how you want to come into the United States. You also have the court. Well, all right, the State Department also deals with citizenship. So you could have a child born overseas, for example. Let me give you an example. So I'm making this up. I didn't have this client. Would have been fun, but I didn't have her. Okay, so Pamela is 9 months pregnant. She decides, against medical advice, that she's going to Paris because she's had these tickets for a long time, whatever. So she gets to Paris, and one day she goes to the Eiffel Tower. Well, guess what? She goes into labor in the Eiffel Tower. Happened that there's a doctor there. The doctor delivers the baby. So, okay, is the baby a French citizen? Probably not, because I think they have citizenship by blood. But is she an American citizen? No. So who's the baby? What do you mean she's not an American citizen? No, mother's an American citizen. Okay. She's probably is, this baby, an American citizen, but in order to get back into the United States, the mother will have to prove certain physical presence in the United States, that she resided in the United States. It's not enough to have a U.S. passport and her birth certificate. She's got to prove residence. So she calls her mother, Mom, help, send me my tax returns, send me my employment records, send me whatever. And the term varies. It could be 1 year, 5 years, and there's a whole chart on this, and it depends on the date of your birth. But anyway, so finally she gets all that stuff together. Well, she can't get on the plane with that, because the airline's gonna say, well, where's the passport for the baby? What are you doing? So she goes to the American consulate, and they will give a certificate of nationality of birth, certificate of birth of a person born abroad. And that's how the baby will come to the United States and then be a U.S. citizen. So thank goodness we have that law, because that would be problematic. The courts, all right, so let's say you're coming to the border and I want asylum, good for you, we're detaining you, and then we'll get you a court hearing in front of the immigration judge. So you get in front of the immigration judge that want asylum, the judge says, okay, give me your paperwork this time, da-da. Well, you get ordered deported. The judge doesn't like your case, doesn't think you qualify for asylum, so you got an order of deportation. You can appeal that to the Board of Immigration Appeals, which is within the Department of Justice. So now we've added another, the Department of Justice. It's over Immigration Courts and Appeals. So you don't like the decision of the Board of Immigration Appeals? Okay, great. You'll go to a Circuit Court of Appeals, which is a federal court. So for us here in Texas, it's in New Orleans for Houston. We're in the district for New Orleans. So you go to New Orleans and you go to the courtroom and you argue your case about why you shouldn't be deported. You lose there, you go to the Supreme Court. Now the Supreme Court doesn't have to take your case. They grant certiorari, C-E-R-T, or they don't. So you don't know if your case will get to the Supreme Court. But let's say the Supreme Court agrees with the lower court, the Circuit Court, okay, too bad, you're out of here, that's it. If they say, no, we think the Circuit Court was wrong, we think you do deserve the benefit, fine, and then it'll trickle back down to the immigration court, and the paperwork and the process will all get going. So you have that for the Department of Justice. Doctors, certain physicians can work in underserved areas, and if they work in an underserved area and they fulfill other requirements, they can get green cards. I mean, it's a complicated process, but they can do it. And then there's a special thing that goes through the Department of State. You have people, Department of Labor is involved for, I'm a world-class chef, and this employer over here at this world-class restaurant in Houston wants me to work for him. Okay, you might be able to get like some extraordinary visa, work visa for that. But let's say, here, I have an Afghani restaurant, and I can't find any Afghans to cook. And I found this guy, and he's I know him from wherever, and he wants to work at my restaurant. Okay, well, he's not extraordinary. My restaurant isn't a 5-star restaurant or anything, but I need this guy. So then you get involved with the Department of Labor, proving that nobody else could do this job because nobody knows Afghani cuisine who's a U.S. citizen available or a permanent resident. So you get involved in all these different agencies. Okay, yes, we already did that. Okay, alphabet visas. Alphabet visas are A to B, and they are temporary. So anytime you have an alphabet visa, it is temporary. You could be coming in as a tourist, a B, a student, an F, and it's too bad they don't match the letters to the they don't. It's too bad. But anyway, you could be a performer in a circus and say, hey, Ringling Brothers wants me to perform in wherever they are in Florida, and I need a visa because I'm from Romania and I do a circus act or whatever. So there are all kinds of visas. You could get one for if you come in as a tourist and the official at the port of entry at the airport says, okay, what are you here for? I'm here for a graduation of my niece next week. Okay, 1 week. You get 1 week or 2 weeks. And usually you would get 6 months, but the person said they just came here for a week. So, as an attorney, you have to say, well, are you coming? I mean, seeing any other relatives or anything? Oh yeah, I'm going to San Francisco and I got relatives in Utah. And I said, well, okay, that's what you need to tell the officer. That's the truth and that's what you need, and then you'll probably get 6 months. There are some temporary visas which you can then go to permanent residence. Human trafficking is one. For example, I had a client who came in, smuggled in and told you're gonna be a waitress in a restaurant. She's from some poor place, in Honduras. They went to her house, picked her up, smuggled her into the US, and they said, if you ever try to escape, we're gonna kill your family because we know where you live. So that's some reason why a lot of these women do not try to escape. But she was turning, she was a sex worker, so she had how many clients, men per night. It was a really brutal story. But anyway, she finally did escape, and she made it to University of Houston, where I was working in the immigration clinic. That was my last job for 8 years. And so we were able to get her a T visa. But I mean, you have to go through law enforcement too. It's not just like, okay, this happened to me. Well, you've got to prove it happened to you. So there's processes. There's also, and from that, if you get a T visa, I think it's 3 years or something, you can apply for a green card. None of the other alphabet visas, except U, which is for crime victims, can do that. U visas, you can't just say, oh yeah, I was working in the grocery store. First of all, you're not supposed to be working if you're undocumented, but okay, you're working in the grocery store, somebody comes in, hits you on the head, you don't see who it is, you don't see the license plate on the car, somebody reports the crime, so you're a crime victim, but you have no other information. So how are you going to prove that this happened? So you've got to have witnesses, you've got to do something. You get the police, you call the police come, and the police have to certify something. So this is not just on your testimony alone. I mean, all of immigration has got complicated things that you have to do. But also for crime victims, and children can derive benefits. So you might have somebody who's a trafficking victim who has a child will derive the same benefit as the parent, which is a good thing. Now, after going through all the temporary visas, there's some wackos, what I would call a little wacko. We have this thing called the Diversity Visa Lottery. And I cannot remember the year this was started, I think somewhere in the 90s. And it's kind of like, okay, you're here undocumented or you're overseas, just fill out this application and mail it to wherever you're supposed to mail it, and it's a lottery. And if you get picked, you get the ability to apply for a green card. So there's 55,000 of these, I think, per year, but they probably have 90,000 or 100,000 people applying. So I had some clients one time who won, and they came to the office, and I said, oh my God, the deadline to tell immigration that you've won the lottery and get the paperwork in is in a week. And they said, oh, we didn't know that. So of course we got it in and we did it, and they got their green cards that way. So every now and then you run into somebody who tells you they won the immigration lottery. That's what it is. It's this crazy thing that was created. The other way that laws are enacted, okay, all of these temporary visas are in this Immigration and Nationality Act, all spelled out, is executive orders. So for example, you've heard of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, the kids who came when they're little, brought by their parents, they're all illegally here. In 2012, I remember this really well because there was an annual immigration conference. There were like 2,000 immigration attorneys there. And we're sitting in different rooms, to hear about this, that, and the other, and they start wheeling in TVs. We're like, well, what are the TVs for? No, Obama's gonna make an announcement. Obama's gonna make an. So he made this announcement that said, this is what you have to do, and this is who is eligible to apply. So a lot of these kids applied for DACA. So they got it, but they've been renewing every couple of years since, because Congress, this is the DREAMER Act, or the DREAMers. Congress does not want to make martial law. So these kids, I mean, of course, now they're kids. This is 2012 or 2024. They're working, they're in hospitals, they're doing all kinds of things, and they're paying their taxes, but they don't have a status. They've got permission to be here and permission to work, but they don't have a status. So this is just, to me, kind of a tragedy, but depending on your point of view, you might not agree. But anyway, that is by presidential order. And also there's this other thing called temporary protected status. So let's say in the Haitian earthquake that happened back when, and you were Haitian and you were here, you couldn't go home because, right, the country was totally in upheaval. So you got temporary status and a time to stay in the U.S. Like El Salvador, this is these things, you know, you can't believe it, but it's true. I think El Salvador, in 2001, people from El Salvador who were already in the U.S. got this temporary protected status, and they still have it. They renew it every couple of years and get work authorization, but they've still got it. Now we have Sudan, I think we have Nepal, I can't remember the other countries that are on this list. So that is by an executive order or similar. The other executive order is right now what Biden is trying to do. So what he says is, if as of June 17, 2024, you're married to a U.S. citizen, you've lived here for 10 years, you haven't been deported, you have no criminal activity, you can apply for a green card in the U.S. without having to leave. Because, oh my gosh, no, this can't be. Anyway, okay, we've got to move on. Okay, many routes to permanent resident status. It takes 3 to 5 years. Most common process is through naturalization, where you fill out a 14-page application, and in a little bit we're going to give you the questions, 100 questions, see how many you can answer. What is the supreme law of the land? I thought it was the Supreme Court first time I went to them, but luckily I didn't say anything. It was my client taking the test. My client knew the answer. I'm not a lawyer, the Supreme Court, that's it, no. Anyway, certain children can become automatically U.S. citizens. Like, a lady comes to me and she says, I want to apply for citizenship. I say, okay, yeah, you meet the requirements, whatever. And I want my daughter to apply too. How old is your daughter? 14. Okay, she can't apply until she's 18. But if she's under 16 at the time you become a U.S. citizen, she automatically becomes a citizen, and you fill out different paperwork. Yeah, I know. These kids then have an administrative ceremony at the CIS office. They're not in an auditorium with 2,000 people where a judge is swearing them in. So they're special cases, and the child born abroad to Pamela fits into that case. How to lose your U.S. citizenship. Oh yes, we know these people, right? Maria Callas and Elizabeth Taylor, who married, 8 times or something. So anyway, I guess she wanted to renounce because, I don't know why. And Maria Callas probably had to renounce because there was no dual citizenship, just like Mexico. Now they have dual citizenship, but back then they didn't. So you had to renounce. If you married, I had a client who married a Venezuelan, and she was a U.S. citizen by birth, can't remember actually, or she naturalized, and she moved to Venezuela, and they said, well, you can't be a U.S. citizen and stay in Venezuela married to this Venezuelan guy. So she renounced, but we won her case to get her back her citizenship because we argued that it was under duress. In other words, she had to do it because she didn't have a choice. What was she just going to say, no, I'm leaving my husband, and he was a Venezuelan citizen. Okay, asylum. Typical people say, oh yeah, asylum. And everybody thinks political asylum. Like, that's the basis of asylum. No, there's 5 grounds for asylum. Religion, nationality, political opinion, race, particular social group. So as I said before, I think that PSG is often decided by the courts. The rest of it is kind of up for grabs. You prove, so I was interviewing a woman at the detention center, and her 3-year-old was sitting on her lap, and the Citizenship and Immigration Services officer was interviewing her. And in her case, a relative had been decapitated, and the people who did that were after her as well as her entire family. So she had to prove up her case. The next person that I want to talk about is someone who didn't go to the detention center, was actually interviewed at an Immigration and Citizenship and Immigration Services office in Houston. This was a young man who was gay, and he had been here already, and he was afraid to go back to his country. So he didn't suffer any past persecution, but he would suffer persecution in the future if he went back to his home country, because that country regarded homosexuality as a crime. Therefore, he interviewed at the Citizenship and Immigration Services office, and he won asylum because he proved that he was gay, that there was a particular social group of homosexuals persecuted in his home country, and that's the way he won his asylum case. The other person I would like to talk about was in court, and she was repeatedly raped by guerrillas as a child. And we argued that that was a particular social group, but the immigration court did not buy it. They didn't want to believe that was a particular social group, so she got denied asylum. Luckily, her husband got asylum on a different ground, and so she was able to tag along with him. Another case I had was at the detention center, and this was a woman who was from Haiti and had gone to Brazil and then made her way to the United States. And I was interviewing her at a detention center, also with her child on her lap. And her case was so awful that the Creole interpreter that we had on the phone started crying. So that was how difficult her case was. There was another case where I was interviewing somebody, and I went to the detention center, a different detention center, and they said, oh no, you can't have a private room. You have to interview this lady by phone. So you know how you see on TV, the criminal people are talking through a window on the phone. And that's how I interviewed her. So you can imagine on a very, very traumatized person, very difficult to interview somebody on the phone like that, but we did. So those are a couple of cases that I wanted to share with you. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Just got tired. Why don't I just try talking really loud for a while? Can you hear me? Okay, I'll try not to blow my nose or anything. I came about this a completely different backwards way. Anyway, in each region there's in each geographical region there's an education service center that's a regional branch of the Texas Education Agency, and we're responsible primarily for providing staff. In each of the geographical regions there's an education service center, and we're responsible for providing staff development and in-service training for the school districts in our catchment area. And anyway, okay, that one. Anyway, I was there for 20 years and I did a lot of different things in 20 years. I worked in special education, I worked in adult education, I did technology training, grant writing, and the last thing I did before I left there, I started the first alternative teacher certification program in Texas. During the time that I was there were two things. I mean, I'd never really thought much about immigration at all, but there were two projects that I was involved with that were my first introduction to immigration. And the first was in 1986, there was an amnesty program, you may remember that. And that was a program that granted amnesty, I can't even say it, to undocumented immigrants who could prove that they had permanent residence in Texas since 1982. Well, we had adult education programs that were going primarily in the rural areas of Region 4 of our catchment area. And one of the pieces of evidence that they could use to prove was documentation of their attendance at the adult education in English as a second language classes that we offered, and also the progress reports that went with that. So that was my first exposure. And then in alternative teacher certification, what we did, we documented that there was a shortage of bilingual teachers in the Houston area. So we recruited a cadre of candidates that had education degrees. Most of them had masters, and some of them had doctorate degrees in other fields other than education. And I screened those people to make sure that, number one, that they were bilingual and that they did have the credentials that they said that they had. And then I took the personnel directors from 9 school districts in our catchment area, and we went to Guadalajara, Mexico, and they interviewed these candidates. And if they offered them a teaching contract, they came in on emergency teaching certificates, and they could teach for 1 year. And during that time, they had an opportunity to take all the required education courses so they could be certified education teachers. But we did it differently then. It's completely different now. There were some pros and cons to doing it this way, but I brought all of them in together as a group. And then I worked with the University of Houston, and we developed some education courses specifically for this group of people. And then we offered courses at the service center. And then at the end of that time, if they had finished their credentials appropriately, then they could, receive a regular teaching contract. Anyway, those were the only 2 experiences that I had. But I left there in 1992, and then I worked for the next 10 years. I was in educational publishing, and I functioned as a vice president of consultant services. So when there were universities and schools all over the world that purchased our products, then our team would go in and we would train the teachers and the programs to use our products. And we also did presentations at local, state, and national and international conferences all over the world. Anyway, then in 2002, I got cancer, breast cancer. And Frankie happened to be my oncologist at that time. But anyway, she did a wonderful job. I had surgery, and then I elected to participate in a double-blind study for medication. Unfortunately, that caused a massive stroke, and with the schedule that I was under then, I was on an airplane going somewhere every single day. It was 12 hours before anybody found me, so it's a miracle that I'm alive today. I mean, it really is. But anyway, I had some severe difficulties, and I was in rehab for 6 months. It was a special program that they had out at TIR, the Texas Research Institute for Research and Rehabilitation. And I went from 8 o'clock in the morning until 5 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 days a week. And I had a whole day of rehab. Anyway, long story short, during that time, my son-in-law finished his residency in family practice. And I didn't mean to do that. He and my daughter were moving into a little rural, how do I back this up?
Down arrow.
Okay. He and my daughter moved to a little rural community in Texas, and I'm not going to say the name, and I'm not going to name any places that I'm talking about because I've been here now for 8 years and things have changed. But anyway, they moved into a little rural community and we're opening a family practice. And he's told me that if I would move there, he would put me to work in the family practice and he could keep an eye on me every day, and that would be part of my rehab. So we thought, okay, that's okay. So the first thing I did, because I was experienced in writing grants, we wrote a Title II grant for the clinic, which meant that we offered medical services for undocumented women who were, it offered prenatal care and delivery for undocumented women, and then followed the kids until age 18. Well, we had a lot of undocumented people that were coming to the clinic. And then, then one of the things he had me doing, I kind of floated around while he was, interviewing staff and hiring staff. But one of the things I did was help make reminder calls. Well, I knew exactly who didn't speak English. So I said, would it be okay if I offer English as a second language classes here at the clinic in the evening? That would help the people be able to talk to the doctors, and it would help all the way around. And he said, okay, if you don't bite off more than you can chew. Well, anyway, while I was doing that, I learned a lot of information from the students that were there. Hold on. No. They shared a lot of information with me. Well, Monica was one of the students there, and she said that this company that was down the road, that a lot of them were working at, told her that it was her sister had lived here before and was married to a U.S. citizen, and he had passed away, and her sister had gone back to Mexico to help with a family member that was ill, and this immigration attorney told her that it was all right for her to borrow her sister's social security number while she was working on immigration. I know I'm going to explain that, but anyway, I didn't know anything about immigration, but that didn't sound right to me. And then Juana told me that 1/2 of all of her paycheck she had to pay to this immigration attorney, and so that meant that every paycheck, her pitiful little paycheck, she was only making half of it. Then at the end of the year, she had to pay $12,000, or there was a threat of deportation. Anyway, and then Jorge told me that he had a green card, and he had married Ana, who is undocumented, and he asked me what was he supposed to do to get her legalized. Well, I thought, why in the world are they asking me? I don't know anything about immigration. Ask the immigration attorney. Well, the only person that I knew to contact back in 2002, I had taught an immersion Spanish course at a small private university in San Antonio called the Baptist University of the Americas. A very good friend of mine who was a Mexican immigrant who was a naturalized U.S. citizen and a retired Baptist preacher. He also worked for the Baptist General Convention of Texas, and he had told me about this position. And so I had taught this summer school immersion course back then. Well, at the university was this guy named Jesus Romero, and he was an immigration attorney, and he was helping students there that were on student visas and wanted to change the status of their student visa. And so he was helping them. So he was the only immigration attorney that I knew. So I gave him a call, and he said, well, let me check. He said, there's a way you can check online to find out what the status is of people that are coming, going through the immigration procedure. So when he contacted me back, he said, they're not even in the system. And then he went to do some other checking, and he couldn't find the name of this supposed immigration attorney at all. And he said, probably he's a notario. And I said, what the heck is a notario? Well, a notario is like a notary public here, but in a lot of Latin American countries where there's so many illiterate people, notarios have the legal authority to do some things certainly not immigration, and certainly not immigration in the United States. So anyway, it made me mad. I was absolutely furious. And he said, you need to channel your anger and into something constructive. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, why don't you become an accredited legal immigration representative? What the heck is that? Well, an accredited immigration legal representative is a non-attorney who can demonstrate to the feds, the Department of Justice, sufficient education, experience in immigration law to be able to provide legal services and is certified by the Board of Immigration Appeals. And he said, your work experience can go towards that. And I go, how in the world am I going to do this? I have no classes, I have no education, no experience. He said, let me show you what to do. The first thing I had to do was to find a nonprofit to work under. Well, in this little community, the only nonprofits around there were churches, okay? So I joined a Hispanic Baptist church. Well, Jesus was part of an organization called ISAC. And ISAC stands for Immigration Services and Aid Center. And it's a national organization that helps nonprofits get legalization status. And to get legalization status, they have to prove and receive recognition. What does that mean? Most churches are nonprofit, but they have to prove that to the satisfaction of the feds, okay? And it's a very lengthy process. And at the time that they're applying for recognition, they also have to apply for accreditation for either an employee or a volunteer of their organization. And that whole process, it's a very lengthy process, and it can take a minimum of a year, and it sometimes can take a couple of years. So ISAC is the organization that helps nonprofits go through that process. So while they were helping the church go through whatever, collect whatever to go through the recognition process, they were helping me get the education and experience so that the church could apply for me simultaneously for the accreditation. So going through ISAC, they recommended some online law courses. So I went through West Legal Services and I took a whole bunch of online law courses, which was a neat trick because even today I don't have fine motor movement of my left hand because of my stroke. So everything I'm doing is with one finger when I'm typing. And I was working full time, I was teaching part-time the ESL classes, and I was going through rehab. So it took me a lot of years. I worked from 2006 to 2009 taking law courses. And then I would go, he had an office in San Antonio, Isaac, and they were working with the Baptist General Convention. And so they had an office in San Antonio, and I went there and did some online courses through them. So it really wasn't until 2010 that the church was ready to start the whole application process. Well, when they're applying for an accredited legal representative, there's two ways you can apply. You can be a partial accreditation or full accreditation. A partial accreditation person can only counsel immigration clients, complete immigration forms, whatever, all the kind that Janet was talking about, and represent clients only at the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service interviews. If you have full accreditation, you can do all the things that Janet was talking about. Well, I didn't want to do that. Of course, the church wanted to apply for me to do that because they thought that was wonderful, and they wanted it for advertising. But I didn't want to be able to do all that. I didn't have enough hours in my day. So I asked them to only apply for me to be a partially accredited representative. Anyway, let me back up and explain what Isaac does. They are, remember, this is national. They're an unbiased immigration information from a Christian perspective. They provide assistance in immigration law training, and they help entities apply for recognition and accreditation. They can help nonprofits start ESL citizenship or literacy programs, and they can provide information and education on immigration matters. And that's really important because when an organization is applying for recognition, they have to document that they've got a law library, and most churches don't have a law library. But if you're affiliated with Isaac, well then, you know, that can help. Anyway, I don't want to do that yet. I'll try to make this really short. Okay, one of the things that I could do in the interim while we were waiting, because it took like 3 years for this process to go through. One of the things that I could do, I could not fill out forms. One of the things that people are paying for when they go to folks like Janet, she's filling out all the paperwork, and all they have to do is go and sign it. You know, she does the interview, but she can fill out the paperwork. Until I was accredited, I could not do that, but I could review what people had filled out themselves, and I could help, make sure that they understood when they were filling out applications and that kind of thing. And in the meantime, I had more people coming to me for my ESL classes at the clinic than the local community college down the road had. And see, they get their funding from contact hours, student contact hours, so they hire me part-time so that they get the contact out, pay the contact hours of credit for the students that I had. I had 80 people that were coming to me, which was way more than they had in any of their classes. Anyway, and then also, through the college, I taught citizenship classes, and I could help people pass their practice for the citizenship test, and we'll give you those questions in a few minutes. And then I could make sure that people understood the applications that they were filling out. And let me give you an example. Eduardo had to fill out whether he had been arrested before. And I said, Eduardo, this is a little town, and I think I remember reading in the newspaper a month or so ago that you were arrested for drunk driving. And he goes, oh, no, I wasn't arrested. Yeah, I had a little bit too much to drink, but my friend, Officer Jackie had helped him build a fence around his property. Officer Jack invited him to come down to the police station and gave him some coffee and called his sister and his brother-in-law to come and pick him up and take the car home. And he said he was really, really nice, but he didn't put me in jail. And I said, well, did he have you sign your name on any papers before you left? Well, yeah. Well, then there was documentation, right? So I had to make sure that he understood he was arrested. Okay. And, all kinds of things like that happen. Okay. Well, then I moved to Houston. And when I moved to Houston, this was in 2016, I moved right here into Eagles Trace. Well, and I thought, well, if there's organizations like Isaac that, can help for the Christian community, what about, what is there in Houston? Well, I found out that there's a Houston Immigration Legal Services Collaborative, HILSIC, I don't know how you say it. Anyway, you can look that up online if you want to. And Janet, you can speak more to that maybe when they ask questions. But I found out that back in 2013, local organizations and immigrant communities recognized insufficient legal services capacity in Houston. So they formed this collaborative. These are all the organizations right now that are in the collaborative. So you can see that there are services like what Isaac was doing and certifying and recognizing, applying for accreditation for representatives, just like I was. And I was familiar with MAM because I had done some volunteer work for MAM before I ever went, to the rural community. And when I went to MAM, I knew that what they wanted to do was to apply for me to be an employee of theirs. You can be an employee or a volunteer, when they're applying for the accreditation. Well, I didn't want a job. I was retired and I was moving here and getting involved in things here. I just wanted to retire, I just wanted to volunteer. So the way they used me at MAM was they had me interviewing people and helping to fill out forms and stuff, and then I could turn them back into their staff. And, but they used me that way. So anyway, and then I also taught some ESL classes and some citizenship classes there. But anyway, we have copies of the citizenship test. I want to say this while she's passing it out. There's 100 questions, and back in 2021, President Trump changed this to have 128 questions, and they had to answer 20 of them correctly instead of 10. And when the test was given to U.S. citizens, only 36% were able to pass. So they reverted back to the original 100 questions. So you can see how you do on the test. Does anyone want to start asking questions now? We're going to hang around for a while.
Push the button. Push the button.
No questions? Yes, sir. In 1975, and how many questions did you have to answer? One? He applied in 1975, and he only had to answer one question.
The judge himself asked me.
The judge asked you?
Yeah, who was the first president of the U.S.?
Who was the first president of the U.S.? Okay. So things have changed, huh? Yes, ma'am.
I used to teach ESL at the Chinese Community Center after I retired, and the question was so much easier
They were easier?
than this.
And so when was that?
That was 2008 to 2012.
But 2008, these are the questions for 2008.
So much easier than this.
Really? I'm sorry?
Yeah. That's one thing that has changed. They change it all the time. First it was in writing, then it was oral, then it was back to writing, then it's oral. They keep changing the citizenship test. But basically you have to answer 6 out of 10.
6 out of
So
10.
you have to study 100, but you only have to answer 6 correctly out of 10.
And you don't know which ones they're going to pick.
Right.
So you have to be prepared with all of them. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question for Janet.
Janet, it's for you.
And the presentation's over, so don't worry, you have to leave. Hey, no, it's okay.
I was wondering, who pays the lawyers for all these people?
Who pays the lawyers for all of these people?
That claim asylum and,
Well, luckily, there are a number of nonprofits. For example,
That's why I put up the slide of the nonprofits. Nonprofits are around to help people that can't pay.
and also, when we would take students to Karn City or Dilley, there were 2 detention centers, southeast and southwest of San Antonio. There was a nonprofit called Raices. So Raices had attorneys. So we'd get there and they'd already have selected the cases for us that they want to see. Like this one woman, and they were paid by Raices. And these are young people because the conditions for living in that house that down there and where they were weren't the greatest. But these are young lawyers and they're gung-ho. The other thing that happens sometimes is you have these big law firms who have pro bono people, and so they'll send down an attorney. I remember one time they sent down an attorney, they didn't want to let her in, and I'm like, what are you, crazy? And she's an attorney from a big law firm, she's trying to help us. But sometimes, you know, the people at these detention detention centers aren't that helpful to attorneys. But, so there are a lot of organizations like that. Like, one time we went down there and there was this, they said, okay, we just saved this Haitian lady. She was on a plane, ready to be deported, and we filed something. I don't remember what they did, and we got her off the plane. But now you need to take her case and do the rest of the work. So this is over a weekend. So the students, so we get there, you know, Friday afternoon, and we leave Sunday around noon. And it's a 5-hour drive or 4.5-hour drive. And so a student and I worked on that case, and then we had a social work student there working on the case. Then what do? They decide in the morning, that was Saturday, they decide Sunday morning they're shipping her to a different detention center because they don't want her to get the representation that she needs by lawyers, right? So anyway, I ended up driving to the other detention center where we interviewed her, and her story, when you go to a detention center and you don't speak Creole, like that's not one of my languages, that you have an interpreter on the phone. So you're in the room with the woman, her child, and social work student this time, and the interpreter's on the phone. Well, the woman starts telling the story of what happened to her and all this abuse and horrible things that happened to her. The interpreter starts crying. I mean, so I figure, well, you know, this is a good case. I mean, she must believe the woman, and she's, you know, from Haiti, and she's the interpreter, and she's crying about what the lady said. Okay, good. So anyway, sometimes the Immigration Service is really helpful to you, and sometimes there aren't. But luckily, there are organizations. Catholic Charities is another one. I mean, we didn't even mention refugees because that's a whole different thing. That's not asylum. But Catholic Charities will help a lot of refugees. They have a whole immigration setup over there. But I mean, the kind of, these organizations, I remember when they were forming this, because I was working at University of Houston, Kids in Need of Defense is another great resource, Tahirih Justice Center, and they all have attorneys who are getting paid by the organization. Tahirih is like, they're housed in Washington, D.C., but they have an office here in Houston. And so what Sandi was doing with MAM was another organization, Memorial Assistance Ministries. So the reason Sandi was, I don't know if you explained exactly why you were doing this. I mean, never mind getting mad at everybody. I mean, you know, but there's so many people out there, and the demand is so great. It cannot be satisfied by attorneys who are getting paid, and a lot of these people have no money anyway. They gave the coyote everything. They gave them thousands of dollars to bring them here. Now they have no money.
Or they pay notorious thousands of dollars. Or they pay notorious thousands of dollars to get legal help, and they don't. And the notorious are all around. They are all around here.
Yeah. Did anybody else have a question? Yeah, Janet.
I just wanted to share my aunt and uncle.
Oh, wait, we're gonna get you on the microphone. You have an aunt and uncle in addition to your grandfather that you gave a trace about? Oh, this might be a long story. Maybe
Well,
no, I'm kidding.
my aunt and uncle, they came to United States probably 1940s. I'm not too sure, way before.
Well, 44 is when the Chinese Exclusion Act ended.
Okay.
There were exceptions to it, but maybe they came right after that.
And,
I think that was an exception for him. He was way up there.
Then there was a
But-
doctor or something.
right, and so my aunt never had to work in her whole life. And so, back then, after you live in the United States for 4 years with a green card, you're automatically eligible to apply for citizenship. So the judge was more impressed with her application form because he asked her, so you've been married to the same guy all these years? Never been divorced? And then the second question is, you never worked one single day in your life? She never did. So the only thing she had to do was the judge said, repeat after me. because she can barely speak English. So judges say, today is a nice day. And she repeat, today is a nice day, and she passed.
Yeah.
That was so
Yeah.
easy.
I know.
Thank-
Sometimes it was easy, sometimes not so easy. Anybody else?
Is there any downside for the lottery applicants who don't get drawn in the lottery?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so you apply for the lottery, all your information is there. If you're overseas, no problem, right? No problem. And if you're here, I suppose the information is available to ICE, who could try to support you, but there is, see, with Amnesty in '86, there was a confidentiality provision, but I don't think there is one for the lottery. I'm not sure, but, I mean, it's a good question, but people seem to apply anyway. So I say, hey. Somebody else have a question?